Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We are now in poem 324. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. Now, this is a fascinating poem. Some have called it controversial. There's a debate about whether it actually was perceived as that controversial in Emily's time. In some ways, this poem is Emily's response to the Ten Commandments. Of course, in the King James Version, Exodus 20, especially verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. There's your key. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor any nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth. We're going to get to that in this poem. The sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. That word hallowed, I think, is for Emily significant. Now, this one was shared with Higginson. We've been mentioning him quite a bit in our comments of the most recent poems. And this was the fifth of 7 poems that was published in Emily's lifetime. It isn't clear whether she wanted it or not. And it was published on the 12th of March, 1864. It was titled My Sabbath. It was published in the Round Table. Now, our assumptions, and this is kind of important assumption, our assumptions, you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments where, for example, we mentioned Higginson. I'm also hopeful that you are able to place this poem in the preceding 323 poems. We just finished with 323, as if I ask a common alms. If you have, then you know that this is a poem that is set with the same kind of iconoclasm that Emily has already been playing with. Emily will struggle at times, obviously, with her views of religion. She never could convert to Christianity officially, and obviously it was the source of some frustration for any number of people close to her. This one was also published later, 1890, and it was called A Service of Song. There is an Emily letter that I think we might want to pay attention to. Emily tried to be part of conventional religion. It was difficult for her. She did go to church on Sunday in her youth. As late as November 1854, she was writing in a letter, number 175, to her friend Mrs. Holland, quote, "The minister today was not our own minister, preached about death and judgment, and what would become of those, meaning Austin and me, who behaved inappropriately," Austin, her brother. "And somehow the sermon scared me, and Father and Vinny looked very solemn, as if the whole was true." By April of 1856, she's writing in letter 184 to her cousin John Graves, quote, "It is Sunday now, John, and all have gone to church. The wagons have done passing, and I have come out in the new grass to listen to the anthems. 3 or 4 hens have followed me, and we sit side by side." And then in a famous description in letter 261 of her family to Thomas Higginson, Emily wrote, quote, "They are religious except me, and address an eclipse every morning, whom they call their father." Now, the scholar David Priest has pointed out that she turned to worshiping God in nature, a certain Spinoza-like view. Some have called this, Sewell, her biography, has called this a tuneful bit of natural religion. I like to argue that this is Emily as transcendentalist, in some ways channeling both Emerson and Thoreau. We know that by age 30, Emily was no longer attending the First Church of Christ in Amherst. She was at that point probably already decided that she would be the renegade, the Promethean, that she would no longer be doing what her father wanted her to do. And by the way, it did upset her daddy that she wouldn't go to church. This is how she says it. "Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home, with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings. And instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches," a noted clergyman, "and the sermon is never long. So, instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along." Now, I think that some have maybe misread this poem as being a little too much tongue-in-cheek, Emily having a bit of a lark. I think Emily is doing something quite profound here, and I think it is directly taken right out of that first reading of the Exodus passage that I just shared with you for the Ten Commandments. Notice the word some. Obviously, she's talking about religious folk. Keep the Sabbath, but she doesn't use the word by. Notice the tightness of the language. It would read, some keep the Sabbath by going to church. Here, for her, it's just simply, some keep the Sabbath going to church. By the way, only in poem 542 does she use Sabbath one other time. By the way, listen to all the S sounds, right, of this poem. She says, I don't keep Sabbath going to church. I keep the Sabbath staying at home. Notice home capitalized. Emily the recluse, maybe? Emily the rebel? And then she'll say it with a bobolink. We've heard this over and over again. She loves this bird. For a chorister and an orchard for a dome. In other words, instead of being inside in a church, I love to be like St. Francis of Assisi maybe, outdoors with the birds singing. Then she'll come back to it. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. You'll remember this from Psalm 104, the white linen vestment of the clergy, right? I just wear my wings. I think just is the key word of this whole poem. And I think that's what makes this poem so controversial. She says, I don't need to go and watch someone all dressed up. I wear my wings. Now, this may be, obviously she's celebrating the birds, she's celebrating her garden. Emily is angel? It's possible. I just wear my wings. And instead of tolling the bell for church, back to the first line, our little sexton sings. You'll remember sexton from poem 96, back to the bobolink, obviously. And then she says something quite radical. God preaches, a noted clergyman. Notice the satire here. In other words, I don't have to listen to a preacher, I just listen to God through nature. And the sermon is never long. In other words, I don't get bored. Can you understand that? Can you see beneath it? So, we're back to the word just like the word just here. So, instead of getting to heaven, at last, afterlife, I'm going all along. This I'm going, of course, takes us to the idea of journeys in the great mythic tradition, Odyssey, Dante, and the like. What is really going on here, too? I think the argument that she's making is that the quiet reverence for nature is far more important to her than the formal religious ostentation that would be a part of religious ceremony. At 2b, think about the liturgies of God as clergyman who doesn't have these long-winded sermons. She's able to say, of course, what she really dislikes about the religious experience by commenting on what she loves about God as the preacher or the clergyman. And of course, all the S sounds are wonderful. At 3a, there has been an argument that has been made that maybe Emily is channeling a reference to a Shakespeare play, as Shakespeare's As You Like It, Act 2. And you'll maybe remember these lines from Act 2 of As You Like It. Sweet are the uses of adversity, and this life exempt from public haunt. Finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons and stones and good in everything. I would not change it, is how the passage in Act 2 of As You Like It finishes. I mentioned Spinoza, and Spinoza's ethics comes to mind. Obviously, Emerson's nature and Thoreau's Walden. This poem channels all of those kind of transcendental views. Some have pointed out that Wallace Stevens may be borrowing heavily from this poem in his Plowing on Sunday, as well as his poem Sunday Morning. Finally, at 3b, what is your view of original and organized religions? And is for you there a difference between the spiritual and the religious? And to what degree do you kind of identify with Emily's Promethean iconoclasm? Thank you.